Welcome to the Alarpa Podcast, the home for cultural chit-chat in and outside Madrid. People will talk. Welcome to the Alarpa Podcast. Joining me in studio is Mary. How's it going?
Alright, I suppose.
That's the best we can hope for. So we've been very busy. We have another interview on the cards. Next week we're going to be recording a man who runs Serve the City, a charity which is in a phase of transition. I've worked with them before. You can play football with people who are alcoholics, or you can help with dogs or like therapeutic dogs, different things like that. And that's going to be our next big interview. I'm really looking forward to that. So that'll be dropping next week along with a blog article. But of course, this is this week's podcast, and we'll be talking about our usual mix of cultural things in and around Madrid. Hey, people will talk. And we've also been very busy with translations and tours and things like that. And we had a tour last Thursday as well around Ep27 and the facades there. How was it for you?
Very nice.
Yeah, it was.
I mean, we both enjoyed it very much.
A very enthusiastic crowd, very inquisitive, asking lots of questions, and that's always a pleasure as well. The day before, I went to one of the stops and got my hair cut in the Gran Peluqueria, and I got a free postcard which is on the fridge. I haven't shown it to you, have I?
I've seen it.
Oh yeah? Okay, good. Do you like it?
Yes, very nice. It's like a photo of the facade that we had anyway, but now we have it as a podcast.
Exactly. So, sorry, I inadvertently gave you a Nazi salute while trying to elevate the audio levels there. She was really great though, because like we've gone into some of the other stops before, and it's other times when you're working with people or go in with a question, they're not always receptive. But she, her grandmother set up the shop, and while she was cutting my hair, she volunteered lots of information and was very enthusiastic, and was very open for us to come in with the group and show off the place, because they have the utensils there as well. And she was very cooperative and was really into the idea of having a tour there, no? So it was pretty nice as well from her. She spoke about how during Franco's period there was a tax on having lettering on signs, and she mentioned, and you mentioned this in the tour as well, that they painted over it with white paint. And so yeah, little facts like that. And she does a mean haircut, so we can't complain too much, can we?
Well, I don't know, because it's not for women, so I haven't tried it.
Oh, that's true, actually, yeah.
Which is in the tour as well. They try to open a section for women, but they eventually gave up on it.
Well, there was a thing in the paper the other day about how women who want to shave their head go to barber shops, but then they feel like the men cutting their hair are creeps. So yeah, it's just apparently a minefield, but I don't know. And also, speaking of the tour, there was the issue of the photographs. So we have put the tour on Airbnb, and currently it's doing quite well. We are getting bookings, but we have a stock photo on the websites, and we've been trying to get a photograph of us talking to the groups, but everybody's very camera shy, and it's very difficult, no? So are you going to Photoshop people into the image, Mary?
We'll just have to start blurring their faces, like they do with children.
Yeah. Actually, that reminds me, I forgot to tell you, because we were talking about weddings before the podcast started, and in the car. And on a show called Extreme Cheapskates, a couple had a wedding reception in a Domino's pizza.
How are you going to know about this show? You wouldn't know what to do by any chance.
No, it just popped up on YouTube randomly.
Okay.
Yeah, and so
after a science video.
Yeah, after a very serious scientific video, and I was reminded of that because one person of all the people had their face blurred, so obviously they did not want to be seen on an episode of Extreme Cheapskates. I wonder why. It's a head scratcher. But speaking of YouTube, well, we'll talk about this more in our new section in part 3 called Bichos and dichos. So dichos are for things that we liked this week, and bichos for things that we didn't like. No?
Yes, I suppose so.
And speaking of bichos, my dear colleague, could you elucidate and illuminate our t-shirt, our burgeoning t-shirt business for our listeners?
We've opened an online shop.
Very good.
Yeah, so, well, you had an idea
Yep.
about some pun, because this is a good thing about, like, teaching that, well, a lot of the time is completely useless in terms of teaching, but in terms of coming up with puns, for example, it works out really well.
And the pun is, will we tell them? Yeah. I think we'll tell one.
Okay, we'll explain the concept. The concept basically is around bicho. Bicho is bug in Spanish, basically.
Yeah. And I'll tell one of them.
Okay.
So the original one is son of a bicho. Which, so anybody who's an English speaker...
I'm going to have to put explicit content for this episode.
Because bicho, with the O is actually very powerful in this sentence because it doesn't make it a swear word.
No, it actually makes it quite fun because...
Yeah. Well, that's the whole idea.
Son of a bug.
Son of a bug. That does have a certain ring to it as well. We have 3 or 4 other ideas, but we will protect those until they're released onto the t-shirt shop. And we'll put the link in the description. Not in this podcast, but most definitely in the next one, I think. And so it's been polling very well. Since we were exposed to all these students, we've been asking them, hey guys, listen to this, son of a bicho, and they're like, ha 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 ha.
Sounds a J.
Yeah, J. That sounded a little Arabic though. And so I think there's a lot of potential there, and we're very excited to jump onto this venture and start it. So I think that wraps it up for part 1. Unless, Mary, we have neglected to talk about something.
No.
Okay, well, we're gonna have a customary musical interlude. Might put in some reading in the middle of that, of like a poetic thing. So we'll think about that. And in any case, we'll be seeing you in the infamous part 2. Welcome back to part 2 of the show. And just as we'd finished recording part 1, Mary, you shared a brilliant idea for the tour with me. I was like, why didn't you say it in the podcast? It's very interesting. But now it's been lost to our conversation between the parts.
But do you want me to say or not? We'll just leave them with...
I think you can say it. Go on.
Okay. No, I just thought it would be cool if you could, because I think a lot of our listeners are not they don't live in Spain.
No.
And I think sometimes while you were explaining the tour, I was thinking, these people must be thinking, that sounds good, but we can't attend because we don't live there. So then I was thinking it would be cool if they could see it online for a small fee.
Yeah.
And they could just follow us around while we do the tour.
And a big shout out to the people who listen to us in small towns or villages. We appreciate you. Unfortunately, Audio Boom doesn't, because you come from a very popular place called Unidentified.
Or unknown at best.
Unknown. That's the one, yeah. I know as well, because sometimes my mother listens, and my town as well, which, by the way, is the biggest town in the southwest of Ireland, is also has an unknown quality to it. According to the bots in the Audio Boom headquarters.
We still get listeners from some pretty impressive places.
Yeah, Ulaanbaatar was the recent one.
Okay.
Yeah, and Yemen.
Wow.
I'm just making Yemen up, but maybe. Well, first of all, Mary, we don't need no...
Education?
Exactly. Are you a Pink Floyd fan?
Not really.
Okay, fair enough. But as a teacher, I'm sure you cringed at that grammatical conjugation. We don't need no education, but it is relevant to what we want to talk about in part 2 of this show. And can you explain more to our dear listeners in Ulaanbaatar and unknown?
Wait, is that in alphabetical order?
Yes, it is. Yeah, all the U's basically. Uruguay.
Uzbekistan?
Yeah.
Okay, yes, we went to this exhibition about education in Spain. The title, well, I understood it was about the Second Republic, which is 1930s, just before the Civil War, the Spanish Civil War. But then actually started at the end of the 19th century. So it was kind of like all the efforts, like all the educational efforts between the late 1800s and basically the war. And also it finished with a section about education during the war, which was very interesting too.
Yeah, that was my favourite part, and we can maybe start with that potentially, or it's up to you. My other favourite part was discovering that your father was fed vermouth in his school when he was a child. He says he doesn't remember anything, but of course he doesn't. He was flutered.
Did you know what vermouth was before you came to Spain? Because it's the same word in English, but I never heard of it in the UK.
Yeah, I knew what it was. I never tasted it, and I still don't really have much of an understanding of what it actually is. It's like an absinthe or something like that,
It's fermented wine.
Yeah?
And then they just put like berries and things into it.
So it's like a cider?
Spices and... No, it's more like... Well, it's kind of like similar to gin, I guess. In the sense that, it's got berries and spices and things like that. But it's just like... it's just fermented wine. That's what it is.
Okay. You sound like you've been caught drinking a lot of it. It's like, sorry, officer, it's just fermented wine.
No, it's just like I really had to read up on what it was because here it is traditional and in other places as well. And I never really, researched what it was. And I was just curious to know what it was.
Yeah, well, if you do come to Madrid and you walk around Tribunal, we've done a video on this as well. You will see... today they're pharmacies or they're other establishments, but they've maintained the original facade, and you will see advertisements for vermouth. So that also speaks to its historical popularity, that it was in a lot of advertisements as well. So it does seem to be like the drink to go to for a lot of people for generations in this city.
I think in the 50s it was definitely very popular, and it's meant to be a typical thing of Madrid, but as my dad argued the other day, it was also very popular in the north.
Maybe this is a hot take that's boiling, but the 50s, especially in Spain, I don't think they probably had access to a lot of variety when it came to what they could drink. Like now we have Coca-Cola, cherry, vanilla, light, zero. So this might have been one of the few ways to drink something fruity and with a different sensation, different flavour compared to the usual suspects. Or maybe that's just completely wrong on my part to speculate about that.
I think all the rise of wine are quite popular because most, for example, which is essentially like grape juice, but with different degrees of fermentation, is a very popular northern drink as well in Spain.
So it's like Ribena for adults, no?
No, it's nicer than that. I don't know.
Well, the reason I say that as well is because yesterday, and I know on a podcast it's a almost immaterial word, but yesterday for us on the 22nd of May, there was a story about chuches for adults because there's drug selling going on to adults in sweet shops in Madrid.
No, it wasn't in Madrid. I think it was somewhere down south.
Oh yeah, like in La Línea or something like that.
I can't remember what it was, but yeah, they were just talking about it in the news.
Okay, so like two kids who get distracted by chatting at the back of the classroom.
Yeah.
Now there's the teacher's like, if it's so funny, share it with the rest of the class. This is bringing back memories of you telling me things about you being the cheeky person in the back of class.
Me?
Yeah.
I think you are talking about yourself. I was the one that got annoyed by kids like you.
Oh, really?
I think so.
And look at us now, doing a podcast together.
Yeah.
Well, you're still annoyed with me most of the time. But that being said, you have to fill us in on the school's system in Madrid during the years. Now, we said we could start with the Civil War, but to be honest, this is a topic that you have a great interest in, so we can use any point as a jumping off point. So where do you want to begin this journey?
Well, I think, the exhibition was divided, physically divided basically between like two areas, but one much bigger than the other one. But I think there was also like a rationale to that, which was related to the fact that education during the Civil War was a completely separate matter, and I feel the location of that part of the exhibition was mirroring that, something that was exceptional. It wasn't the norm, because obviously kids were being taught in terrible circumstances, and the dynamics were like trying to keep normality and trying to keep on doing activities with them and teaching them, and trying to basically keep their minds away from all the tragedy that was happening. Related to that is also the fact that a lot of kids became orphans during the war. So these places, these schools, were just far more than an ordinary school, that, as we understand it, because they provided shelter for these kids. They also provided hygiene, for example. Like a lot of kids, we're talking all the time about state schools, of course, and even the ones that didn't lose their parents, a lot of the time they didn't have things like showers, for example, and you didn't have to be very poor not to have a shower, because in those days it wasn't the norm. And I remember, for example, my father always told me about the toilet that was outside the, crossing the yard and all this. So this was like pretty normal, not to have a toilet in the house, or even like, a shower, of course. So I think they just an essential role in basically hygiene, education, but also providing an escape for these children. And it happens many times that we see when there's a conflict that they ask kids to draw how they see things, and then it's always like a very kind of poignant reminder of what is happening, because kids tend to portray things in a very innocent but also a very accurate way. Like they have better appraisal of what's going on around them than we actually think most of the time. And some of those drawings were there, and they just showed how kids show the world around them at the time. So I think that whole section was really interesting. There was some video material describing these places, and I think it's just an interesting subject, because more and more we see things about the Spanish Civil War that we haven't dealt with for a very long time. But what actually happened to children during that time is something that is not dealt with very often. So I think it was important to bring it up.
Okay, well, that is an interesting point about the children, because, as I said to you when we were there, one Christmas I got a book about the children who died during the 1916 conflict. And I think they're planning another book, the writers of that, of the children who died during the Irish Civil War or the War of Independence. So it is strange that it is something that is a huge factor or dimension to a conflict, but generally it's not really historically investigated. You mentioned the drawings. The drawings are fascinating because there is so much material there. A huge emphasis on drawing. But also what I want to say is, like, throughout the exhibition, there's two dimensions to the schools. Before the Civil War, you mentioned as well how they got taken to the dentist showers. There's pictures of children receiving shoes as well. And even they mentioned how the Commodore, the eating area, was kind of established so people, or well, children could be educated on how to behave in a large group as well. So you see this changing society. You see not only just education in the traditional sense, but also like these new concepts coming in and a real desire to show people how to be sanitary and to be healthy. Now, when it comes to the Civil War, the other dimension is quite interesting as well because, yes, you do mention, as you mentioned, and it's clear as well in the exhibition that it was a place for, or it's like a quasi orphanage. It was a place to teach children and, in a way, protect them from what was happening because it was very brutal. But on the other dimension, the other hands of this, you can see as well the propaganda of the Republican side. Now, obviously, it does make sense because it was a Republican government that was being attacked. So, in a way, they're trying just to maintain normalcy, everything was okay, and make people believe that nothing major was really happening. In fact, we saw a very famous headline there from a newspaper about only a couple of generals have
seconded the coup, and
and everything's totally like absolutely nobody has joined the coup. That's like more or less a translation, direct quote from that headline. And two things kind of stand out for me from that part of the exhibition. First of all, you have photographs of children, and I use this term kind of weirdly, I guess, but manning the barricades, and there's photographs of them, and all the captions in the photographs from that time are like little Pepe is like training his younger brother or his younger fellows how to fight the art of war, and they're very happy to be doing it. And then there's also newspapers being published at that time, and the story is incredible because there's this whole scene where this girl is playing in the patio or a playground with a doll, and she falls over and she starts crying, but it's only pretend tears, and they say, "Oh, what has happened, Wappa? What's happened? Who's hurt, you or the doll?" And she's like, "The doll." And then the teacher says, "Hey, you can cure the doll." And then the little girl kisses the doll, and she skips away merrily, and they talk about how the teachers are jealous of the kids because they're playing with such abandon and having a great time. And basically they're really reinforcing the fact that it's like a paradise, like the war doesn't exist, the kids are learning, they're healthy, they're happy, and the worst things that happen are just maybe you fall and bruise your knee in the playground as well. And it's very bizarre to see that because it was such a brutal time as well. As a Spanish person, what's your take on that propaganda elements that we saw as well?
Well, obviously, in every conflict, there's propaganda from either side. For me, it was like, I don't know. I think I told you at the time that it was bittersweet because, on the one hand, I could see why they were doing it and how it was responsible in a way, in the sense that they had to help keep people calm, and they were trying to, I think historically that's not unusual for the side who's being attacked in the first place to try and keep a sense of normality and things being alright. But then on the other hand, for me it was like a bit dramatic because obviously just reading these headlines saying it's failing and there's been a coup, but to be honest nobody supported it. Of course it was effective at the time because or at least for a while, because obviously the people they didn't have the mass media that we have now, so that was like their main, that and the radio were like their main sources of information, and the radio in particular was very important for propaganda for both sides during the war. But I don't know, it just makes you sad because you see basically that they were being told this, and now that the reality was very different. So you just kind of feel a bit sorry for them, I suppose, in a way.
Well, definitely as well, because it is a civil war where on the Republican side a lot was made that the women fought in the barricades as well, and that it's a great thing. Everybody's in it together. There's a socialist element to it.
Yeah.
But that's because they could choose to do it, while people who are younger don't necessarily have that agency to join a war, basically, and be used in propaganda as well. You mentioned the video. The videos there were interesting. One was which I've seen before, was like instruction manual on how to survive an aerial bombardment, which of course is very useful. Another one was a Russian documentary, which is very interesting as well, because it showed a lot of dead bodies, including that of children, and very affecting. But on the other hand as well, the Russians were quite unscrupulous in the Spanish Civil War, and of course even in the Second World War, which you've mentioned on a previous podcast about Ivan's War, the Russians in the Second World War. And even something like that is as heartbreaking, as heart-wrenching as these civilian deaths. You can see in this documentary how it's been so artfully and very deliberately and very precisely been commodified and taken for a propaganda purpose. So they're like in that final section of the exhibition, you do see a lot of other things that stretch out beyond the Civil War, and it is at times interesting and also appalling as well, to be honest with you. But okay, so that's the Civil War section. Is there anything else you want to say about that? No, so I think we can move on to the other elements. So this stretches back quite a long way. And what are the other aspects of the exhibition that really grabbed your attention?
Well, I think the rest of the exhibition is focused on basically the origins of the modern school in Spain. It starts at the end of the 19th century, and I think a very striking thing when you first come in, there are some dates and some explanations of the context and some statistics as well. And we saw there that illiteracy in Spain at the end of the 19th century was around 80% for women, which is absolutely crazy. And to be honest, for men, it wasn't far off.
It was 70%.
70 odd. So,
yeah.
I mean, it's quite shocking. It would be interesting to see statistics for the countries as well. But I mean, obviously Spain in the 19th century had a very rural population, and we were quite late with the Industrial Revolution and later than other countries. But I don't know. I'd be interested in comparing those figures, because I found it really shocking. So, there comes a point where institutionally they think that the school should be improved and more people should have access to it, and it should be more holistic, and that's what they try to do. And I suppose a lot of the things that we've talked about of hygiene and manners and just broader things about society came from there.
Well, yeah, but you can also see echoes of very modern conversations, because in England, for example, you might hear people talking about faith schools, religious schools, and whether they have a place in a modern society. While back then, even when the schools were first thought up of, there's huge debates about whether this should be a conservative school, like a Catholic school, or more of a liberal school. And you had this kind of tension between the factions that you would see today as well. This has to be like an artistic different type of school, or this has to be a religious institution, and things like that.
I think in Spain there's a very particular situation that I think it's alien to many countries, but it's essential to understand education in Spain, and it's the fact that the church has a special, and it sounds strange, like a special relationship, but that's what it is. Because
same in Ireland as well.
So it's like the Concordates of 1953. Basically, the state gave away education competencies to the church, so they were able to basically take over that. So of course this exhibition didn't go into that, But even though kind of like church authority was sanctioned at that time, it's not to say that it didn't exist previously, of course. So I think there's a long-standing tradition, even like from the time of the Jesuits, you know.
The Jesuits,
Yeah, since the modern times, there's a long-standing tradition of brotherhoods and priestly orders being involved in education. So I think that's a fundamental thing to understand, and we know that very well. So then, to know the origins of the state school and the ideas that they had beyond that, I found quite interesting, because I don't think it's as well known as other parts.
As other parts, yeah. Okay, so there's two things I want to talk to you about as well. The first thing is like the material that's there, because it is very interesting. But also, finally, we can finish on what because we discussed the reaction or possible reactions to the exhibition and how controversial it could be as well. So we'll finish with that. But I'll ask you as well. So we saw lots of pictures. People were drawing in the Civil War. They're drawing tanks and scenes of war. But there's a huge emphasis on learning drawing, on technical skills. The girls were taught how to tend to the house, and the boys were kind of geared towards mercantile commerce, international trade, things like that. But we also saw copybooks, textbooks that they'd be reading as well, report cards, lots of photographs as well. So very rich in primary sources and things that are actually used back then, and even testimonies from people as well, describing how these things functioned in these like little video booths where you could pop on headphones and hear another version of the story. What's your reaction to the collection? They actually had the physical collection inside the museum.
I think a lot of things were very interesting, and there were things that are not that commonly displayed. So a lot of things, it wasn't just to do with notebooks and these materials that we are probably more familiar with. It was also to do with models of, for example, model of the Earth and the planets, like the solar system. Or...
Yeah, there's one of the solar system that you really loved. It was a mock-up of all the planets and things like that. And so it was amazing in that regard. And now finally on this subject, you were talking about how people... unless you have more to say.
No, it's alright.
No, go on, continue.
No, it's just like all the models of camera oscura, or like the predecessors of cameras, and just things to do with math and chemistry, and well, I don't know, it was like very hands-on.
Yeah, very practical education, no? Am I allowed to go on to the next part now?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. So the last part is about the reaction. So we were talking about that people, because it's a neutral exhibition, it's just showing what happened, but people could go there and interpret it perhaps politically and disagree with that this never happened, this is propaganda. Could you elaborate a little bit on that?
I think it's pretty obvious that the whole exhibition is thought out in... Well, it starts with different governments, but basically it focuses very much on the role that the Republic had in modernizing education. And that's a third of the exhibition, but a very kind of like significant third, I would say. Well, the fact that they transition from one part to the other one is a big sort of neon sign that says, and then the devil took it all away. Kind of like gives you an idea. Which, I mean, of course, it might be a fact in itself, but just the way of expressing it could be controversial for some people or whatever, in the sense of the idea of taking it all away, because well, one might agree or not agree, let's say, but I know that some people that lived under the dictatorship education could see it as them building on that rather than
taking it away.
Yeah.
Another issue as well.
I'm not saying I agree with that, by the way.
Don't worry. I think we understand. And also in terms of you mentioned orphans. That implies, of course, people getting killed. Parents either, well, for whatever reason, not being alive anymore to look after their kids. That could also be a controversial topic for some people of a political persuasion, because to talk about Republican deaths always generates the response, well, people on the other side died too, and it becomes almost like a tit for tat. Well, how many people did we lose? How many people did you lose? Can we stop talking about your losses? What about the people on our side who are lost as well? Sometimes that's also a kind of controversial line of conversation, or a way of analysing things like this in the Civil War.
Everything to do with the Civil War is controversial in Spain, and everything is problematic because, well, as I was saying to you when we saw the exhibition, unfortunately, the latest people that were alive back then or that were children back then are the ones that are dying now. So I think in a way you could think that means that things are going to move on, but then on the other hand, I think it actually means that we're going to have less original information and more later interpretations of what actually happened. And I think that that's actually very dangerous.
Well, yeah, because I remember, like, you mentioned that you're worried because it was passing from living memory into full-on history, that maybe people would just ignore this part of history. And in one sense, yes, maybe that could happen where it's not original interpretations and that can become corrupted in some way. But I think that there's always going to be historians that have the right attitudes that interpret it in the future, and that even in the future when it's analysed, it can be handled in the proper way. But I remember now as well a story you told me. This is another controversial thing in the sense of like archaeologists digging up things from the Civil War, but this is kind of a nice story. Do you remember what I'm talking about?
About a rattle.
Yeah, I mean, okay, I say a nice story. It is very tragic in most of its aspects, but the fact there's some kind of closure in modern times is the nice element to it, of course. Can you explain a little bit about that story?
It was just a dig a few years ago, because there came a point where obviously there are a lot of people that were killed during the war, that are buried, on the sides of motorways and things like that in Spain. So a lot of relatives have wanted to try and find the members of the family, of course. And in this case, it was a park in a village that was dug up, and then they found this skeleton of a woman that was holding like a very colorful rattle, that at the time they thought it was impossible. Well, because it had such bright colors that it looked like it could be like a Fisher Price thing from yesterday.
Yeah.
So because there was a park on top, and they thought it might just be a transfer somehow, but well, archaeologically it was strange because it was the same layer and a series of technicalities. But then when they tested it, they found that the material that it was made for, which was camphor, is smelled in a particular way. So they knew that it was made at that time, or were pretty much certain. And in that case, basically what happened, or what seems to have happened, is that this woman had several children. She was accused of being in favor of the Republic when she was already in a national area and in a Franco area. And basically, in the end, she had a court martial and she was sentenced to death by fire squad. And apparently, it seems that she took that rattle, her baby's rattle, when she was killed, and this baby, which then would have been 9 months, is now 80 odd and is an old man that didn't know very much about his mother at all, and is in the process now of receiving this rattle after knowing that it had been found and that his mother's body had been found with it.
Okay, so as I said, a very tragic story, but ultimately having that recognition and that closure, I think is very profound and a nice ending to what is a terrible story. But thank you for explaining your thoughts on this exhibition, and we'll leave it there for part 2, and we'll join you very momentarily I should say, in part 3. So, welcome back to part 3 of the show, and now it's time to play Dicho or Bicho. So, things that we enjoyed during the week and things we did not, and in no way stolen from another more successful podcast. So, so things that I've enjoyed this week, well, I enjoyed a video from The Atlantic, a great channel on YouTube, about a place where you're not allowed to die. Well, that's the rumor, but in reality, you're not allowed to be buried there because it's a layer of permafrost in the Arctic, and basically a lot of things are trapped underneath there, even potentially diseases, including anthrax, the bubonic plague, and there have been cases in Russia where maybe a horse carcass that's been uncovered after being frozen in a particular place releases like an anthrax outbreak, and then that has to be controlled as well. What's interesting about this as well is that there's the grain depositories there with all the seeds in case there's a natural disaster or some kind of disaster. Scientists can clone or somehow genetically modify those seeds and start putting them back into circulation and guaranteeing the world's food supply. Because of global warming, that was actually flooded, and that could be at risk as well. So that was a very interesting story, and Ludo Ionati, a wonderful pianist, is the Greenpeace's official composer. What that actually means, I don't even know, but there is a classic scene of him playing the piano in the middle of the ice and everything, and it's quite epic. So that's one thing I like this week. What about you, Mary? Sorry, went mad there. So
The same as you.
okay, that's a coincidence.
Because you sent me the video.
One thing I also liked, Blind Boys podcast about faction fighting in Ireland, and also discovering 4 new podcasts on my Player FM.
Wow.
So because I listened to one called, well, I can't remember what it's called, but it's about the economy, and they had a kind of guest podcast about Trump and his relationship with Deutsche Bank, and I discovered that podcast called Trump Incorporated, kind of investigating all the allegations about his business dealings. Another one about Trump, and then that kind of led to a Guardian one, Today in Focus, where they focus in on stories. There's a very interesting one which is about that plot which was uncovered to murder a Labour MP. They kind of go into detail about that, which also ties in with another podcast I recently subscribed to, where they kind of talk about how to reclaim democracy. So all these kind of issues of kind of current affairs get they are united by their thematic qualities. One thing I didn't like, the Player FM app is acting up, so this is definitely a bicho, a bug, quite literally in this sense, I think, because I tried to download another podcast, and last week's episode was listed as the new one, and vice versa, the new one was listed as last week's episode, and I downloaded the wrong one. And for some strange reason with our podcast, when we do a new episode, it's like, latest episode was like today, 2 hours ago, 2 days ago. But then within a few hours, it goes like, it dates it to an episode from maybe like 3 weeks ago. or 7 weeks ago, and then it goes down the classification in the podcast list, because obviously they do it chronologically, most recent podcast first. So yeah, gotta email someone about that for sure. Anyway, so that was like things I liked and didn't like, the dichos and bichos of my week. Anything else you want to say about that? No? Okay, perfect. So you can find us, well, this podcast, you're already listening to it, so listen to it on any platform, but please do plug our other platforms, social media, the blog. Mary?
Yes, so we're on Facebook, El Arpa Media, on Twitter at El Arpa1, Instagram, basically we're everywhere. LinkedIn.
Yeah, and you can find us on Patreon if you want to support us financially. Just the price of a cup of coffee or a beer will be sufficient. And yeah, we'll be launching, this is a little teaser as well, we already have a tour around Lava-PS, but we're going to be launching another tour soon because of popular demand around the live Lope de Vega, Quevedo, and Cervantes. These are three amazing Spanish writers who are more or less contemporaries and lived like in the vicinity of each other as well. And we will be delving into that on that tour and explaining their lives and their interests and all that jazz and crack. So that's it for this podcast. Thank you very much for listening. You can check in on our podcast episode next week, which will be with the interview with the director of Serve the City. That should be a good one. And until then, good luck.
Bye.
The El Arpa Podcast, the home for cultural chit-chat in and outside Madrid. People will talk.